Hey, this is Matthew from TomoPop.com, and today we're going to take a look at some pro wrestling action figures, specifically TNA Wave 1 from Jakks Pacific. These figures just came out recently, and today we're going to get up close and personal with them and decide if they're worthy of you chanting TNA, TNA for, or if you're going to be as disappointed as you were when you found out that Vince Russo is taking over creative. So, without further ado, let's get up close and personal and take a look at the packaging of these figures.
The first thing I noticed was the size of the packaging. Jakks WWE Deluxe Aggression figures were packaged with more cardboard, as are their current UFC Deluxe figures, so seeing these figures with less cardboard is a welcome addition for me, honestly. I like the simple, reflective silver TNA logo on top of the package. The clear plastic is six-sided to resemble their signature ring, which is no longer used in TNA anymore.
One thing that I really like about the packaging is these beveled edges that you see here on top of the plastic. It's a very minute detail, but it adds some nice dimension to the packaging, and it's something you don't really see that often in toys to begin with. It's a little more expensive to do, but it does make it look pretty sleek.
The back of the packaging is nothing too crazy, just some pictures of the other figures available, and that six-sided ring. There's no biographical information for the wrestlers, but Jakks never did that with their WWE figures, to be fair, so nothing really lost there.
So that was our first glimpse of the TNA action figures packaging. Now let's take a look at who is represented in this first wave.
They are the phenomenal AJ Styles, Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, the King of the Mountain Jeff Jarrett, the man called Sting, the Samoan submission machine Samoa Joe, and M?
Yep, that's right, folks. This is now the artist formerly known as Suicide. I'm really not quite sure what this little thing is supposed to be here. I mean, I guess maybe now he's just the artist formerly known as Suicide and he pulled a Prince on us. Or maybe it's a tattoo of his astrological sign, which would be Scorpio. Or maybe he's now under the control of Babidi from Dragon Ball Z and he's now Majin Suicide. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, maybe he's now part of the Sailor Moon universe and he's going to become a Sailor Scout. Sailor Suicide. Or maybe it just comes down to the fact that parents don't really want kids playing with a toy that's named after killing oneself. That could be it, but I'm going to have to go with the other options. Alright, now, we've seen what these guys look like in the box. Now let's take a look at them out of the box.
Off the bat, these figures might look familiar if you bought any of Jakks Pacific's WWE figures. These are the Deluxe Aggression bodies being repurposed for their TNA license. I know some collectors enjoy this style and others don't. I have never really been fond of the Deluxe Aggression style, but I will say that they have gotten better over time, and I find myself actually liking these. The biggest problem for me was the cartoonish size of their body parts in the old figures. Thankfully, Jakks has downplayed the size of their arms and legs and made them more realistic, and that old problem of the muscles being absurdly large and out of proportion is no longer an issue. Like all of their figures today, Jakks Pacific uses real scan technology to capture the most photorealistic look of the TNA wrestlers, so there's no doubt you will easily recognize these guys. The outfits of each wrestler is spot on and accurate, from Kurt Angle's custom knee pads to AJ Styles writing on his kick pads to Samoa Joe's tribal face paint. The painting is good here, no missing spots or lazy blotches, and the skin tones all match, unlike those UFC figures I reviewed before. Now, why the UFC figures had the problem with two-tone skin paint, and why these TNA figures do not, I have no idea, since I would assume they're made with the same plastics. Each figure has 20 points of articulation, much like their previous Deluxe Aggression figures. In fact, very little other than the size of the muscles has actually been changed between the lines, so if you have any of those WWE figures, you know what you're getting yourself into already. One could argue that this might be a complaint, since Jakks is just recycling, but on the other hand, one could argue that Jakks is also keeping their figures in a uniform scale throughout their different lines. The biggest flaw has to be that none of these figures come with any accessories at all, and there does not seem to be any room for accessories in the packaging either. Most of the Deluxe Aggression accessories were as cartoony as the muscles on their figures. This time with the TNA figures, we don't get anything. Not a chair, not a ladder, nothing. The UFC figures are having the same problem, although now we seem to be getting a championship belt every now and then with the figures. But with pro wrestling figures, you'd think they could squeeze in a chair or something as small as a microphone even, since the accessories are really important to the characters quite often.
Alright, now let's compare these figures to some other toys from other lines. And to start things off, I want to take a look at how these figures stand up next to the Toy Biz TNA figures.
Toy Biz released this Samoa Joe in a 2-pack with AJ Styles. The Toy Biz figures featured more articulation, namely in the fingers and toes, than the Jakks Pacific DA figures, and are in more realistic proportions. The spacing of their bodies allows for more flexibility than the Jakks figures. However, the Jakks figures have a much better likeness, especially when Jakks Samoa Joe looks like Samoa Joe, and Toy Biz Samoa Joe looks like John Belushi. Now let's take a look at the TNA figures against Jakks' other big franchise, their UFC line. Here is Chuck Liddell standing toe-to-toe with AJ Styles. The UFC figures have that two-tone paint issue with their skin, and the paint does not stick as well to the textured shorts of Lydell, as opposed to the smooth plastic on the wrestlers like AJ here. The UFC figures have an additional shoulder joint though, which I would like to see very much on these TNA figures, as well as that flexibility that the UFC figures also seem to have, that the TNA figures would definitely benefit from.
So there you have it, TNA Wave 1 action figures by Jakks Pacific. So what's the final verdict? Well, there's some good, there's some bad, and there's some ugly, but there's mostly good here. They've definitely made up for some of the mistakes that they made previously with the UFC figures, specifically those two-tone paint issues we talked about in the last video. There is, of course, that major lack of accessories, but that's something that I'm sure down the line they're going to be fixing. Otherwise, for a first try, it's not too bad. I'm looking forward to seeing what else they can do in the future waves. Speaking of which, Wave 2 is going to be coming out very soon with Hulk Hogan, Amazing Red, Hernandez, Eric Young, Mick Foley, and our first repaint, which will be AJ Styles. Of course, I'm not really fond of the repaints, but we'll get to that when we talk about Wave 2 next time. So for $10.99 at most toy stores, if you're a fan of TNA and pro wrestling in general, I say you might as well go for it. If you're not a fan of pro wrestling, then I don't know why you're watching this video in the first place. I'm Matthew from TumblePop.com. Thanks for watching.